Hello and welcome to Coffee with Dr. Carla. I'm Dr. Carla and I'm so glad that you're here with me today. Today our goal is to talk about some mental health related issues and hopefully end some of the stigma surrounding them. So I am a huge fan of podcasts and I really like my cult podcasts. I like my kind of true crime type podcast, but but there's this one podcast that I recently discovered called What Comes Next, and what she did was she was interviewing people who perhaps told their story at one point, and then we hear their story, and then obviously life doesn't end then, and so then she talks more with them about what comes after they kind of came forward with their story. So as I was listening to this one particular podcast, she was interviewing a woman from Australia, and it's important to note that here. And the woman was telling her story about how her mom had been a victim of domestic violence for pretty much as long as this young woman can remember. At the age of 13, she finally, when this woman was 13, her mom was finally able to get away from her perpetrator, her abuser, and something happened where the mom had to interact with this person again, and then she never came back. She disappeared. And apparently, and I may have this wrong, but my understanding as I heard this story was that at that time, when we're talking maybe 15, 20 years ago, the police were not willing to investigate her disappearance. They stated that, well, she was an adult and she could go wherever she wants, and there's no evidence that anything happened. And despite them suggesting that this perpetrator, where there was tons of evidence that he was abusing her, was the last person known to be with her, they did nothing about it. And then there were some other things that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, and that's what got me started. She talked about the fact that they couldn't investigate him because some laws that were in place in Australia. And it wasn't until he died that they were even willing to investigate her disappearance. So now here we are. Her mom still hasn't been found, right? She hasn't resurfaced. This man is dead, and now they're finally willing to do something about it, right? It's my understanding that her mom's body had never been found still. But she was talking about this, and she said something to the effect of, it was a tough place to be in, because often women who were abused, if they made any accusations in court or brought it as a case, that they could be found guilty of somehow slandering or something like that. And I thought, that's crazy, right? And I thought, well, that's I went back and made sure that I remembered, it was Australia, it wasn't the United States. Surely the United States has a better reputation. I don't know what I was thinking. When I looked at the history of domestic violence and how we in the United States have dealt with it and are dealing with it, I knew it wasn't good. Like, I have plenty of experiences with clients where the system is broken and it continues to blame the victim. But I didn't realize how broken the system was and how recent many of these laws are. And it just made me really pissed off and really sad. And so I wanted, it kills me when I have someone sitting in front of me and they they are clearly being abused, and to get them to understand that they are involved in this, dynamic where the one is using their power over the other. Maybe it's financially, emotionally, physically, sexually. It doesn't matter. All of those things, count. And the person sitting in front of me is saying, well, my situation's not as bad as other people. Like, it's a comparison thing. And yes, domestic violence can happen where a woman is the perpetrator or the man's a perpetrator, right? It's not exclusive, but we hear more and more cases of where the woman is the victim and a man is the perpetrator. I strongly feel that there are far more men who are the victim, and but because society already has issue around this whole subject, that they don't come forward, because then they would say, well, how can a man so big be beat up by this little woman? Aren't they and just really emasculate them even further. So I think there's a lot more abuse going on that way, and people are not willing to admit it, and I don't think that they would find a place to have that conversation and be taken seriously. And so that really is a sad place to be in. And I really feel that it's, I feel like it's important to have our eyes opened up. So I did a little research, and there are some things that just blew my mind. And so I apologize for reading some of these, but I cannot memorize this much baloney. So if we look at between the 1500s and the 1800s, yes, I know we're in 2023, early settlers in America based their laws on an Old English common law that explicitly permitted wife beating for correctional purposes. The states tried to break away from that law by saying that the husband is only allowed to whip his wife with a switch that was no longer than his thumb. And that was in the early 1500s. Now you're thinking, well, we are hundreds of years away from that. Oh yes, that's fine. But here we go. Mississippi Supreme Court allows a husband to administer moderate chastisement in cases of emergency. That was 1824. Thankfully, in 1871, Alabama was the first state to rescind the legal right of men to beat their wives. How insane, right? That we were in and of that mentality there, right? Now, if it stopped there, I think I might have been okay. But then we fast forward to the 1900s to the 1960s, and basically what happened was that this issue got moved to family court, so that the men who were being tried would have their hands slapped, but there was no criminal charges, right? Because they didn't want to make it a criminal thing, and that was in 1911. Oh no, I'm sorry. That was in 1962. The family court started in 1911, but in 1962, they were transferred from the criminal court to the civil court, right? And then only civil court cases could be brought against them. Again, no criminal findings whatsoever. Beating as cruel and inhumane treatment becomes grounds for divorce in New York in 1966, and you're like, okay, thank God. However, here's the caveat. But the plaintiff must establish that a sufficient, whatever that means, a sufficient number of beatings have taken place. 1966, a year after I was born. We get into the 60s and 70s, and we have the women's liberation movement happening. And unfortunately, the world didn't take the equal rights of women very seriously. In Chicago, married women who leave their husbands due to battering are denied welfare because of their husbands' salaries. That was the 1970s. So you want to know why women stay? There you go, right? And it just keeps going on and on and on. So you think, well, surely by now it should be better, right? Well, sort of. We get to 1994, and we finally have Congress taking action. Joe Biden actually put forth Violence Against Women Act, and for creating resources and also punishing perpetrators. It was reauthorized in 2000, 2005, 2013, and most recently in 2022. I will say that with people I know who are currently going through this, the laws are still not good. It wasn't until 1990 that judges were required to consider any history of spousal abuse before determining child custody or visitation rights. 1990. That's just 33 years ago. Prior to that, they didn't have to consider that. In 1992, the Surgeon General ranks abuse by husbands to be the leading cause of injuries to women ages 15 to 44. Right. And the sad thing is that when I have this timeline of progression and laws that help make things safer for women, and again, this is primarily something that gets talked about in regards to women, but in general, it stopped in the 90s. Now, I happen to have gotten an update through another source, and that's why I knew that Biden reauthorized this in 2022. But there's not a lot going on still in regards to this. And it just makes me sick. And people wonder why women don't leave, right? Why women don't want to come forward and let people know, right, what's going on. Besides the fact that, once a woman decides to leave, that's the most dangerous moment in her life, right? But then if there's no place for her to get help, and, somebody might say, hey, it's the shelters. They've got all these different, yeah, they are, and they are spread thin, and they're working their butts off, and they do a fabulous job, right? But if all the stigma keeps surrounding it, then what are we supposed to do to help these people who are victims of domestic violence, right? And so I guess I challenge you that if you know somebody who is a victim of domestic violence, it could be physical, it could be emotional, it could be financial, right? Okay. Do something. Reach out, help them. Don't discredit them. Well, she's got an attitude, or she pushed back. Well, there's a point where you get tired of being the punching bag, and so maybe you do push back. It still doesn't negate the fact that they're a victim of domestic violence. So I challenge you to reach out and help, to say something, because if you don't say something, then basically you're saying you're okay with it. So remember, you can change your thoughts, discover your potential, and transform your life by focusing on your overall well-being. So until next time, keep working on being the best you possible.